Hello. I'm going to tell you a story, one you already know, but I'm going to give you some inside information that you might not know. One day, an egg met a sperm, and they decided to get together. And they put their DNA together and made a cell, and it started to divide and divide and divide and divide, and pretty soon a fetus was formed. And after growing and growing in a sheltered environment for 9 months, a baby emerged and took its first breath and became a new person. And the first question was, is it a boy or a girl? Hello, my name is Mary Ellen Gordian, and I am a family doctor, a grandma, and a public health professional, retired now. But when I was working, I delivered about 2,000 babies, so I know a little bit about how this works. When the parents ask you, is it a boy or a girl, you can't say, I don't know. You just can't. You have 2 minutes to make a decision, and you don't have any resources other than what does it look like. You don't have genetic testing. You don't have imaging. You don't have anything but the external appearances. You have to make a decision. No, there is only 2 minutes and only 2 choices. To make matters worse, the baby's genitalia is swollen from all the maternal hormones it's been subjected to in utero, and the process of coming into the world is pretty hectic sometimes. So you have only 2 minutes and only 2 choices. And sex organs are not necessary for life. They're usually ignored, diapered, forgotten after birth. Hearts, lungs, kidneys, brains, intestines, all those are geared up to function. But the sex organs go to sleep, and they stay asleep for 8 to 15 years. They're not doing anything, and they tend to be ignored. We need to talk about what's happening in utero. What happens in utero depends on a specific gene, and that gene is called SRY, or SPRY. When it is present in the fetus, it stimulates a series of events that create the epididymis, the vas deferens, the ducts that will carry the sperm from the testes to the prostate gland. If SPRY is not present, the ducts will become fallopian tubes, the uterus, and the upper part of the vagina. The lower part of the vagina is made of other cells. The same tissues that form the labia in a female can form the scrotal sac in the male. The clitoris can grow big and become a penis, or it can stay a clitoris, which is smaller. What actually happens depends on many things. It depends on whether there's a SPRY gene present. It depends on the presence or absence of hormones. It depends on the presence or absence of hormone receptors, and the presence or absence of other enzymes. And I'm going to tell you about that. Occasionally, the basic structure of the sex organs remains unclear. When this happens, physicians rely on a chart called the Prater scale. I'm going to show you a copy of that here. The Prater scale is numbered from 0 to 5. 0 means normal female genitalia. 5 means normal male genitalia. And each step is a gradual transition from female to male. The infant with ambiguous genitalia, which is what this is called, when you can't tell exactly, it's ambiguous genitalia, that individual will also have an ambiguous gender. Female with ambiguous genitalia happens about 1.7% of the population. That's a lot of people. They have what's called a disorder of sexual development, or better, a variant of sexual development. This is not an illness or a disability. They will grow strong and healthy, both mentally and physically. But something has to be written on that birth certificate. Sometimes a DSD, or disorder of sexual development, will be recognized at birth if they have ambiguous genitalia. However, many times it is not recognized at birth. And it's only discovered because it renders the person sterile. And it will be discovered when a couple investigates their infertility. I didn't learn about this in medical school, and that didn't happen in my day. When I was in medical school, we didn't know anything about these disorders of sexual development. We did know that sometimes the baby's urethra did not go all the way to the end of the penis. It appeared to exit somewhere on the shaft. But we thought that was a urology problem, not a disorder of sexual development. Parents still have to make a decision at birth. When I was at school, we really didn't know how important the brain was to the development of sexual development. And now the decision has to be made, but surgery should be avoided until after puberty, because the sex organs really are not woken up until puberty, when the brain puts out a hormone that stimulates sex organs to develop their function. They have structure in the infant and small child, but no function. Parents have to make a decision, and usually they made the decision and then they applied it, whether it worked for the child or not. Now, I've seen a great change in sex education in my lifetime. That's because studying sexual development in humans is a relatively new area. The first studies of human sexuality were done at Indiana University. That's my alma mater. Indiana University sponsored Dr. Kinsey, and he did a very large study of many thousands of people, giving them a survey that was specifically about sex. And what he found was very unusual for the time. He found that he discovered that about 50% of the men had had sex with another man. This was at a time when homosexual behavior was considered illegal and was severely punished. After survey results were published, I guess the men who make the laws decided, well, if it's that popular, it shouldn't be illegal. So the laws have changed, at least in the United States. Masters and Johnson went even further. They did observations of people having sex, and they took measurements of the genitalia. I don't know how they got their volunteers. But I'm not here to talk about sex research. I want to talk about what is known about sexual development. Why do I want to do this? Because I saw in the newspaper a letter from an intelligent, educated person that said, God made only male and female, and anyone who says otherwise is faking it. Well, I think this is a gross underestimate of God's ability. I realize that most people have limited experience looking at genitalia. And I need to explain some of the facts to you. Even if you've had hundreds of different partners, that's really still a small sample for the 350 million people in this country and 9 billion in the world. Most people have had probably less than 100 observations of genitalia other than their own. But of course, everyone is normal. Everyone is normal. Let's talk about genetics. You probably already know that humans have 46 chromosomes, and 2 of them are called sex chromosomes. That's X and Y. It's a brilliant system. 23 chromosomes from each parent. From the male parent, sperm has 23 chromosomes. One of them is either an X or a Y. In the female, has 23 chromosomes, and one of them is an X. So it's obvious when they get together, it's the father who decides whether it's a boy or a girl. Tell that to Henry VIII. Men have only 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. Women have 2 X chromosomes. The brilliance of this system is that because you have 2 chromosomes that are the same, if you have a problem with a gene on one, you can always use the other one. Except the Y, of course. The Y doesn't have a partner. That's why if an X chromosome has a defective gene, it usually only shows up in male children because they have only 1 X. They don't have a backup. The female children would have to have 2 defective genes on their 2 X chromosomes for it to be seen. Chromosomes are subject to a lot of stress. I mean, there's radiation, not just from X-rays, but there's cosmic radiation hitting the Earth all the time. And there's also chemicals and things that happen at work. So chromosomes are under a lot of stress and can get broken and do get broken. But there's remarkable systems that have been developed to fix things so that most of it can be repaired. But sometimes a gene gets knocked off of a chromosome and gets picked up and repaired and put on another chromosome, a different chromosome. I think this may be the case in 2 NIH cases that I read about and that occurred in real people. One is called ovotesticular disorder. I don't know how many people have this, but in this situation, the child is genetically a female, 44 chromosomes, autosomal chromosomes and 2 X chromosomes, but she has ambiguous genitalia, indicating some poorly functioning spry gene may have gotten picked up by another chromosome. The exact cause is not known, but this person can have both male and female gonads. Gonads are what we call the ovaries and the testes. She will make both eggs and sperm, but she is infertile. The other case I've read about is called gonadal dysgenesis, or streak gonads. There the person appears female, but is genetically male, with 44 autosomal chromosomes and XY. The Y chromosome has apparently lost its SRY gene, its spry gene, because the appearance is female. If there's an SRY gene, the appearance will be male. She is also infertile, but because she has a uterus, she can carry a child to term as long as a fertilized egg from someone else can be implanted into her uterus, and apparently this has been done. There are also people whose chromosomal makeup is 44XXY. Because they have a Y, they appear male. It's called Klinefelter syndrome, and it occurs in 2 out of every 1,000 births. So it's not so rare. It's pretty common. And because they have a Y chromosome, they develop male sex organs. And also, there have been recorded cases of 44XXYY. So the sex chromosomes are important, but they're not the whole answer here. There are also people who have only one X chromosome and nothing else, no Y chromosome. They look female. It's called Turner syndrome. Besides the X chromosomes, there are other reasons for deviations in sexual development. In the Dominican Republic and Papua New Guinea, there's a number of people who do not produce 5 alpha reductase. And by not producing it, I don't mean that they don't go to work and produce it. They don't have it in their body. They don't have a good gene for 5 alpha reductase, which is an enzyme they need. But the enzyme that changes testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, which is the more active form. So a fetus will be making a little bit of testosterone, but it's not very much. And if it doesn't get transferred into dihydrotestosterone, the penis doesn't grow. The penis remains pretty small and the testes don't descend. Fortunately, for the people who do not have this gene, it doesn't interfere with their life because 2% of the population live happily with this gene. How it shows up is in male infants. If they get that gene and cannot produce the 5 alpha reductase, they're unable to produce stronger testosterone. Their penises don't grow very large and they can look like a large clitoris. And their testes don't descend, and the scrotal labia forms a dimple, which can look like a vaginal opening. And of course, you don't do a physical exam on a baby, you just look. The midwife says, "Girl," and the child is raised as a girl. But at puberty, when the pituitary stimulates their internal testes to start producing lots and lots of testosterone, the testes do descend, the penis enlarges, and the dimple retracts. This girl has become a boy. Because this gene is pretty common in the population, nobody gets too excited about it in Papua New Guinea or in Dominican Republic. They understand this. And the little girl who started kindergarten is a boy going into middle school. Androgen exposure is also a well-known cause of DSD, or disorder of sexual development. Androgens are made in the adrenal gland, which sits on top of the kidneys. They're not in the sex organs. Androgens are part of the system that produces testosterone and estrogen. And if androgens accumulate, this can be a real problem for a female fetus. Androgens can also accumulate when a person lacks the enzyme aromatase. Aromatase, that enzyme also does not cause any terrible problem for the person, but it will make the androgens accumulate. And when that happens, a genetic female fetus will be exposed to high levels of androgens and she'll be masculinized. She is born with a very enlarged clitoris that will look like a penis. And her labia can even become fused from the androgen. At birth, she looks like a boy with undescended testicles. Not too unusual. But at puberty, the pituitary gland in the brain stimulates the ovaries and she begins to have menstrual cycles. the boy has become a girl. And although she may need to have a surgical procedure to open her fused labia, there are close to 6 million people in the United States with DSDs, disorders of sexual development. That's a lot of people. And there's nothing wrong with them. They are normal people, good people, and God made them all. So I hope that you can see that a decision they made immediately after birth about gender may not be accurate. Infants will only have basic structure, but no function to their sex organs. What is put on the birth certificate should be provisional. When the brain wakes the sex organs up during puberty with gonadal stimulating hormone, which is GSH, if it comes from the pituitary, it's the same hormone for both men and women. That's when they become who they are. Now I would like to talk a little about transgender and homosexuality. What does it mean to be homosexual or transgender? When Kinsey found that 50% of the males had had at least one sexual encounter with another male, but 50% of men are not homosexual. Homosexual persons are those who prefer to have sex with people of their own sex. But young people try things out to see what fits. And heterosexual people sometimes experiment with different kinds of partners. And some people have no preference. They can enjoy having sex with males or females. That's the B part of LGBT. Gay and lesbian people do not think of themselves as that they are the opposite sex. They just prefer having partners of the opposite sex, of the same sex. But transgender people, on the other hand, feel that they have been assigned the wrong sex. Even though their genetics corresponds with their sex organs, many feel that they're misassigned, even early in childhood, even pre-puberty. There is no reason for them to lie about their feelings. It is sometimes dangerous and often difficult for them. But there is no genetic signature. There is no specific structure in the brain when it's imaged that is recognized as a sign that a person is gay or a person is transgender. Although I'm sure researchers are still looking, because they have been looking for a long time. You have seen that there are cases where genetic testing doesn't agree with the genitalia. You've seen instances when infantile genitalia can be misinterpreted. But everyone usually knows when they meet someone if they're talking to a man or a woman. How do we know? We don't ask to examine genitalia. Animals do that. There are some of the things that give us clues. Height, body weight, muscle mass, body shape, hair growth, how high your voice is. But all these things exist in both men and women. Men are generally taller than women, but there are women that are taller than men, and there are some very short men. And there are also facial hair on men, but women can also have facial hair, especially as they get older. And in fact, men have breasts, and men can even get breast cancer. So there's no sure thing that you can say, well, that's a man because of this, that's a woman because of this. There is a spectrum of sexuality. Just like there's a spectrum of intelligence and a spectrum of ability, there's a spectrum of sexuality. We're all somewhere on that spectrum, from male to female, and we announce it to the world by our behavior and our appearance. We tell the world who we are. The brain tells us who we are, and that's the most important organ in sexual development. What makes a person a specific gender? Well, the government says If you produce eggs, you're a woman. And if you produce sperm, you're a man. What about that ovotesticular person producing both eggs and sperm? And what if you don't produce either? In early life for boys and later life for women, neither sperm or eggs are being produced. And if a man has an orchiectomy or a vasectomy, does that mean he ceases to be a man? That may be why some men are so resistant. But the brain is the most important sexual organ humans have. When transgender persons assume their brain's gender choice, they sometimes seek surgery to remove the egg or sperm producing gonads that they don't want. Then, according to the government, they're neither male or female. Somehow people have the idea that what is written on a birth certificate is an edict from God. Well, I signed a lot of birth certificates. I filled them out, and what's on a birth certificate regarding gender is a first approximation. It's provisional until puberty, and sometimes even later in life. Our brains tell us who we are, and some people used to have to live very inauthentic lives in order to conform to social norms. But hopefully those days are past, and people can accept being who they are. Although we should look to develop some rules for people who are transitioning, such as participation in sports and shared locker rooms, because everybody's comfort level is important and needs to be addressed. The most important sexual organ, at least for humans, is the brain. We should believe them, just as we believe our own brains. Believe your own brain, and don't be afraid. God made you the way you are, and everybody is normal.